I want to begin by reading Matthew 26, the Last Supper. It's such an important, pivotal moment at the end of Jesus' ministry. It is the night of his betrayal. It's the night when everything that he's been working toward begins to culminate into this final moment of Judas taking upon himself the desire for this desire that he's had for wealth, for material possession. And he decides in this moment to betray Jesus. And Jesus knows it. And that's a really fundamental key to the story, I think, that we're going to talk about here in a moment. But as I thought about it, I thought about feasting together. And one of the things that is just incredibly unifying across all cultures. I mean, I don't know of a single country or culture where feasting together with other people isn't just a truly intimate sign of friendship and of family even, right? There is just something so universally held together by all people that when you sit down at a table together, when you share a meal together, you're sharing in something more than just food. You're sharing in comfort and friendship. You're sharing of your lives together. Me and my family, we've had the privilege of being over to some of your houses, and it's such a blessing to be able to do that, to sit down at a table and to share life together while sharing food. The same thing is true 2,000 years ago in first century Palestine. It wouldn't have been treated any differently then as it is now. This is an intimate moment that Jesus is having with his disciples. And what happens in this moment is just so profound and so just like Jesus that you can't, or I couldn't this week help but marvel at what he chooses to do in spite of what he knows is coming. So let's read from chapter 26, beginning in verse 17. We read these words. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover meal for you?" "As you go into the city," he told them, "you will see a certain man. Tell him, 'The teacher says, my time has come, and I will eat the Passover meal with my disciples at your house.'" So the disciples did as Jesus told them and prepared the Passover meal there. When it was evening, Jesus sat down at the table with the 12 disciples. While they were eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." Greatly distressed, each one asked in turn, "Am I the one, Lord?" He replied, "One of you who has just eaten from this bowl with me will betray me. For the Son of Man must die, as the Scriptures declared long ago. But how terrible it will be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born." Judas, the one who would betray him, also asked, "Rabbi, am I the one?" And Jesus told him, "You have said it." As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take this and eat it, for this is my body." And he took a cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and said, "Each of you drink from it, for this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Mark my words, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. I want to talk about the Last Supper. It's such a special, special moment. But to do that, we have to briefly touch on Passover and what its meaning would be for the disciples, Israelites, as they're sitting around this table together, sharing this meal. What is so impactful about this moment? Of course, the Passover begins in Egypt, right? Most of us probably know that. We've read the story before in Exodus chapter 12. It inaugurated this moment for the Israelites when they truly became God's people. They're off in exile, or not in exile, but they're off in slavery in Egypt, forgotten. For 400 years they've been forgotten by God, or seemingly forgotten by God, right? After 400 years, you'd think probably the people are going, all right, this whole God character that we're supposedly the children of Abraham, he really doesn't care about us any longer. I mean, after 400 years, that seems like a plausible conclusion to come to. It's fairly logical to go there, right? But God shows up anyway. God reminds them that they are his. And it inaugurates this moment that leads to the covenant, this binding and lasting husband and wife covenant between God and his bride Israel that we see played out in the Old Testament. And it's beautiful because God claims them. He rescues them and he delivers them safely out of slavery in Egypt. And the moment that began all of this, of course, is Passover night itself. It was a night when the Israelites were told to eat together as a family, to go into their homes, to slaughter the animal and the lamb in a particular way, and to eat together of this meal. And so they do. And they're to take the blood and to smear it over their doorposts, right? Because as they enter, they're cleansed by that blood. And then whoever this angel of destruction is, the destroyer, is going to come and kill the firstborn for those who choose not to participate in this meal. Jesus, in Christian theology, naturally gets identified with the Passover lamb, most specifically because of this moment of participating in the Passover meal like this. His blood in our lives and in our hearts, as Randy was talking about just a few minutes ago, it shows that we are those who follow the commands of Jesus. The same as the Israelites who placed the blood on their doors showed that they followed the commands of God and were truly his people. The same thing is true of those of us who submit to the blood of Jesus and who drink it every week with him and participate in that feast. I mentioned that the Israelites were to eat the Passover meal as a family. It's interesting that Jesus is sharing it with his disciples. Right? Why wouldn't he be with his mother? Why wouldn't he be with his brothers? Why wouldn't he be with his extended family sharing this meal? Well, we've talked about this a couple of times in Matthew. Over and over again, Jesus identifies his disciples as his new family. He has chosen them to not replace totally, but to be the people that he's choosing to call family, because he's inaugurating something new, the same as God inaugurated something new for the Israelites so many years before Jesus. He's doing that same thing in this moment. And so he is eating this meal with his family. The same as we come, and just as we took of the bread and the cup a few moments ago, we share in that meal as a family every week. We are family. And I've stressed that point for a couple of weeks now, that we are family. We have to see each other that way. When we look at each other in the eye, we have to recognize brothers and sisters of Christ before us, and not just people that we see on Sunday. You are family to each other, and you have to be that to each other. And so now Jesus has taken the central theological and spiritual moment for the Israelites, and he's completely redeveloped it. He's taken it, and he's mixed it all around, and he said, okay, here's what it used to be about. Now, here's what it's about. It's about me and what I'm about to do for you. And so he's taking this people and he's calling us the new Israel, those who share with him in this. So that's the Passover. Let's talk about this night of betrayal that this takes place on. Because the night of the Last Supper is the night that Jesus was betrayed. Judas, we know, has already sold Jesus out to the religious leaders. But the intimate setting of this feast, again, I want to bring that up. It sets up this betrayal in an interesting way. Because it's not just Judas betrays him and then immediately the religious leaders come and arrest Jesus. There's this in-between moment of the Last Supper. Judas betrays him, and then he chooses to go to this intimate family feast and to dine with Jesus and to be part of this amazing inaugural moment. And Jesus doesn't do anything about it except point out that somebody is about to betray me. It's really quite amazing. And that betrayal is going to last until chapter 28, as we're going to see next week. That betrayal lasts for 2 chapters. And so 3 lonely days, Jesus is in the hands of his enemies. It's not a good situation. And even in this moment, knowing his immediate betrayer is in the room, Jesus still allows Judas, and really we could lump all the disciples together because they all forsake him in the end before his death, right? But Judas in particular, he still allows to eat, to dine at his table, to participate in this feast, which we know becomes the institution of the Lord's Supper. And what's so amazing about this is that, to me, what this shows over and over again, As we've looked at, so many different stories. The one of the workers in the field, where the master at the end of the day goes ahead and pays everybody the same amount. And those who have been working all day, slaving away all day, what are you doing? Why are you doing this to us? Didn't we work longer? Didn't we work harder? Don't we deserve more? And the master goes, not really. I'm going to give whatever I want to give to whomever I want to give it. So Jesus shows us that God turns things upside down. Or how about all over, the first will be last and the last first? Again, the kingdom of God turns things upside down. Or the king who forgives this amazing debt to this person who owed thousands of years' worth of money that could never repay it. And the king goes, that's okay. You're forgiven. He turns the system upside down. I see that in this story as well. In this moment, Jesus knows he's betrayed. And yet he invites Judas to the feast anyway. He says, come and sit and eat with me. I want you there because you're my family. Is that not lunacy? To invite your betrayer to sit and dine with you. You see, it's Jesus' mercy and love that sets him apart from anybody else we could ever talk about. So many people want to focus on the wrath and this would-be anger and judgment. And that is certainly in Scripture. But to me, it's the love and the mercy of God that shines so brightly in the pages of His Word. And it's interesting because as I thought about this, I thought about relationships and friendships that I have. And I began to question, why do I have those relationships and friendships? I mean, really, why am I friends with certain people? Is it because I like them? Is it because they're nice to me? It seems like most of us tend to have friendships and relationships because we're looking for something from that other person. It becomes about what we can get out of it. Just, think for a moment about your own friendships and relationships and ask yourself, why do I have that friendship with that person? I hope that's not the reason, but I know I found myself going, if I really think about it, maybe I'm friends with that person because I think that I'm going to get something from this relationship. And that becomes really the operating procedure for a lot of people, I think. And as soon as they no longer think that they're going to get something out of a relationship, okay, well, I can throw it away. So marriages get tossed aside all the time, right? I'm not getting anything out of this relationship anymore, so why do I want it? Why do I need it? If they're not going to do for me, I don't have to stay in this relationship, right? Our world's got a weird way of looking at relationships. But not Jesus. Jesus invites Judas, his betrayer, into his midst to feast, to dine in this intimate family setting. And he says, you're welcome at my table. Any of us willing to invite our betrayers over? Any of you want to call your enemies today and say, hey, I prepared this amazing Sunday meal. I would love for you to come and share it with me. No? Okay. Yeah. I didn't think so. We're not your enemies. Don't think of us as enemies. But thank you for the invitation. Are we willing to do what Jesus did? To share a meal with people that betray us, that hurt us, that make us feel sad and alone and hurt? Is that the kind of people that we can be? Jesus could have easily looked around the room and named them individually, named each of his disciples individually, and told them exactly how they were going to betray him and forsake him that night. I mean, he could have looked at Peter and said, hey, Peter, guess what? So you're going to walk into this courtyard, there's going to be a fire, and you're going to kind of hang around it. And this person's going to come up to you and say, do you know this Jesus guy? And you're going to say, nope, I don't. And then a second person's going to walk. He could have done that, right? But he didn't. He allowed this moment to sit and to work on their minds and their hearts. It's really breathtaking and beautiful. And as horrendous as the betrayal is that Judas, works against Jesus, as devastating as it seems to be to this ministry that Jesus has had going on for years, and to the good news that he's preaching, betrayal doesn't dictate his future. Love does. He didn't go to the cross because of betrayal. He went to the cross because he loves us. Betrayal doesn't dictate the future that Jesus has, because we know that it doesn't have the final say. Death gets defeated in the end. And because of that, because Jesus goes to his death, knowing that the Father is capable and ready to bring him forth from the grave, Jesus hands over. That's the language in Greek that's used. He hands over the bread and the cup to his disciples. What's really interesting about that word, hands over, in Greek, that's the exact same word that's used between Judas and the religious leaders. He hands over Jesus to them. So here we have Judas handing over Jesus' body for destruction, for death, for mutilation. And Jesus takes the bread and he breaks it and he hands his own body over for life, for regeneration, for possibility, for hope, for salvation. Jesus takes this word used in a negative context with Judas and he says, I have something different that I'm doing with my body. I'm handing it over for your salvation. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. Another interesting choice of words in this feast, did you catch what Judas called Jesus? He called him rabbi. Now, most of us are going, okay, so what? A lot of people call Jesus rabbi, right? What's the big deal about that? Well, in Matthew, the only people that ever called Jesus rabbi are outsiders. His disciples only ever, in Matthew, call him Lord. Now, in Mark and in Luke, he gets called rabbi by his disciples, but not in Matthew. Not in Matthew. Calling Jesus rabbi is a distinctive mark, a distinctive feature of outsiders coming to Jesus to speak to him. And so what has Matthew done? He's placed the words of an outsider on the lips of the betrayer. And so if you've been a diligent student of, obviously you don't read Greek, but to people who read Greek back then, that would be, it would stand out. Whoa, Judas is calling, the disciples don't call Jesus rabbi in Matthew. They call him Lord, not Judas here. He calls him rabbi. Already we see Judas is no longer part of the in-group. But where is he? Where is he? He's at the feast. He's sharing in this intimate meal anyway. The final point I want to make about this betrayal is to notice how the disciples respond to Jesus' statement. Did you catch what they said? It's not me, is it, Jesus? That's essentially what they're saying. Surely I'm not the one to do that, right? I haven't really betrayed you yet, have I? And what's interesting to me about it is this doesn't appear to be an emphatic denial, right? They're not going, no way! I would never do that. That's way beyond me to ever think about doing. There's no protest of innocence here. It seems kind of more like a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Well, maybe, I hope I didn't do that. Surely I'm not the one. And I think, honestly, this is precisely how I would respond in this situation, because there's no way to be certain how we might respond to any given situation until we find it or face it, right? No doubt the disciples hoped that they wouldn't forsake Jesus. I doubt any of them, other than Judas, went into that night thinking, can't wait for him to die so that I can walk away. They're not doing that, right? They really believe. In fact, in the Gospel of John, we see Thomas say, let's go to Jerusalem so that we can die also, right? I don't think they have any inkling that they're ready to forsake Jesus, but of course, that's exactly what happens. For all they had seen and heard, they lacked the faith and dedication to remain by Jesus' side in his most difficult moment. Simply hoping that we have the faith isn't going to help. I can hope that I have enough faith all day long. Am I cultivating faith in me, the kind of faith that in any situation I'm not going to forsake my allegiance to Jesus? Is that the most important thing in my life? Hoping that it is doesn't make it so. You have to cultivate that kind of faith in your life. So what I'm going to do right now is I want to give you my couple of takeaway questions And I'm going to kind of offer the little invitation right now as well. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the story of the crucifixion. I spent some time thinking, what can I say about the crucifixion that most of you haven't heard? And the truth is, not a lot. I'm not one. I don't want to go into the gory detail of how many lashes he might have received and what his back would have. I'm not interested in gory details like that, because that's actually not in the Word. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read chapter 27, and that's how we're going to end today. And so, Nick, you'll know whenever I'm done reading, and you'll just come up at that point, because I'm going to offer the invitation now. At the end, when I'm done reading, if you have a need, we're going to stand and sing, and you will have that moment to come and to receive prayer, encouragement, whatever it is that you need. But I want to end with these, or I want to give these two questions, because I know some of you like these little conclusion questions that I give, and so I don't want to miss out doing that. The first is, how do you look at relationships in your life? Are they simply things for you to get something from, or are they things that you're pouring yourself into so that others are blessed? Are you willing to go into messy relationships like Jesus was and to offer that forgiveness? And the second thing is, would you have had the faith to stand by Jesus in his darkest moment of need? And I know none of us, again, can answer that question 100%. There's no way to. But we can cultivate the kind of life of faith where we can say with pretty good certainty, yeah, I'd stand by him. Not just hope that we would. We have to work at that faith, though. All right, those are the two questions. I'm going to read from chapter 27, and then we're just going to let the Word of God kind of hang. Oops, I didn't mean to click it. We're going to let the Word of God hang until we come back to it next week with the resurrection. So in chapter 27 we read, "Very early in the morning the leading priests and the elders of the people met again to lay plans for putting Jesus to death. Then they bound him, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, realized that Jesus had been condemned to die, he was filled with remorse. So he took the 30 pieces of silver back to the leading priests and the elders. 'I have sinned,' he declared, 'for I have betrayed an innocent man.' 'What do we care?' they retorted. 'That's your problem.' Then Judas threw the silver coins down in the temple and went out and hanged himself. Now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. 'Are you the king of the Jews?' the governor asked him. And Jesus replied, 'You have said it.' And when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. 'Don't you hear all these charges they are bringing against you?' Pilate demanded. But Jesus made no response to any of the charges, much to the governor's surprise. Now it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner to the crowd, anyone they wanted. This year there was a notorious prisoner, a man named Barabbas. As the crowds gathered before Pilate's house that morning, he asked them, 'Which one do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah?' He knew very well that the religious leaders had arrested Jesus out of envy. Just then, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this message, 'Leave that innocent man alone. I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night.' Meanwhile, the leading priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be put to death. So the governor asked again, 'Which of these two do you want me to release to you?' The crowd shouted back, 'Barabbas!' Pilate answered, 'What should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?' They shouted back, 'Crucify him!' 'Why?' Pilate demanded. 'What crime has he committed?' But the mob roared even louder, 'Crucify him!' Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere and that a riot was developing. So he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, 'I am innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours.' And all the people yelled back, 'We will take responsibility for his death, we and our children.' So Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip and turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. Some of the governor's soldiers took Jesus into their headquarters. and called out the entire regiment. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head. And they placed a reed stick in his right hand as a scepter. Then they knelt before him in mockery and taunted, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him and grabbed the stick and struck him on the head with it. When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him again. And they led him away to be crucified. Along the way, they came across a man named Simon who was from Cyrene, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. They went out to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. The soldiers gave him wine mixed with bitter gall, but when he tasted it, he refused to drink it. After they had nailed him to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. They sat around and kept guard as he hung there. A sign was fastened above Jesus, above his head, announcing the charges against him. It read, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Look at you now. You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well, then, if you are the Son of God, save yourself. Come down from that cross." The leading priests, the teachers of religious law, and the elders also mocked Jesus. He saved others, but he can't save himself. So he's the King of Israel, is he? Let him come down from the cross right now. Then we'll believe in him. He trusted God, so let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, "I am the Son of God." Even the revolutionaries who were crucified with him ridiculed him in the same way. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some of the bystanders misunderstood. I thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a reed stick so he could drink. But the rest said, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah comes to save him." And Jesus shouted out again, and he released his spirit. At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. The Roman officer and the other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that had happened. And they said, "This man truly was the Son of God." Many women who had come from Galilee with Jesus to care for him were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee. As evening approached, Joseph, a rich man from Arimathea who had become a follower of Jesus, went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate issued an order to release him. Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a long sheet of clean linen cloth. He placed it in his own new tomb, which had been carved out of the rock. Then he rolled a great stone across the entrance and left. Both Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting across from the tomb and watching. May God bless the reading of his word.